Okay, so welcome back. This is the second one today. There's another one we need to get to, but I'm not sure if that will end up posting until tomorrow. But I wanted to continue the thought process along the Erika Kirk effect. And the question I wanted to start with is, what happened to Seth Rich? Narrative control in the age of simulation. So, welcome back. This is Tech Reality with Barbara. I'm based here in Silicon Valley, and I always put a technology spin on what we know is true in the world. I was kind of grabbing onto a tagline that you follow the feed in order to find the truth. And that really seems to be step by step what I'm working towards with each one of these conversations. So, what happened to Seth Rich? Let's talk about that. There are stories that everyone knows. Now, when I said the name or you saw it in the title, that may not have rung an immediate bell, but it's in there. And an oh, yes, that was strange. The story didn't line up. So there are truly stories that everyone knows. And then there are stories everyone knows about, but no one is allowed to fully ask. Seth Rich is one of those names, not because we know what happened, but because we were told to stop. Just stop. This is what we now call the Erika Kirk effect. Tonight, we're not there to prove a conspiracy. We're here to examine a pattern, how narratives are established, protected, and even enforced. In the age of billion-dollar media, political power, and algorithmic reality shaping, how do we even know the truth? So let's take a step back a moment. Who was Seth Rich? Seth Rich was 27 years young, just a young man with huge aspirations, working and living in the capital city of a country that he adored. He was at the top of his game. He didn't know that that literally would be the climax. So Seth was 27 years old. He was a data analyst working for the DNC, also known as the Democratic National Committee. He wasn't famous. In fact, very few knew his name until after the fact. He wasn't powerful, and he was certainly not a public figure, even though he very much worked for them. Again, he was employed by the DNC, and there's a whole wave or lists of individuals that were connected to that organization that have either disappeared or suddenly decided they just didn't want to live here anymore. From the back of the head. He was unalived in Washington, D.C. in July, the summer of 2016. The case officially was classified as a homicide during an attempted robbery because the initial claim of the other didn't stick at all. So they just said it was a robbery and no arrests were made. Those are the facts that everyone agrees on. But the story stops, it falls flat on the ground. Kind of like the pipe bomber from the January 6th time frame. We got it, don't ask questions. Any of the big events that we've seen, it's gone. We got the answers. That's the end of it. But we want more. And as I stated on a recording yesterday, we want to make sure that we're just not open season where they can pick off any one of us that they want. So the official narrative and why questions have emerged. The official explanation was very simple. A robbery gone wrong. It happens all the time, especially in a city as dangerous as DC. But here's where the public curiosity began. Not certainty or curiosity. Widely noted inconsistencies often discussed publicly. No personal items were taken. What were they there to rob? Location and timing really raised questions. Cases stalled quickly. The media just moved on to the next story and never revisited it. None of this proves anything. But in every other homicide like this, journalists will dig in. Police have cold cases, and if they can't solve it immediately, they'll keep digging back in and keep revisiting it. Well, except for here. The ups and downs, how the story rose and then collapsed. For a brief moment, Seth Rich became unavoidable. Then something unusual happened. Not just debunking. The narrative was contained. It stopped. It went no further. But this is a pattern that we're seeing. The story appeared, the story retracted, entire topic labeled off limits, questioning itself became disqualifying, and that's not how truth is usually defended. That's how reputational risk is managed. Now, again, this was simply a robbery gone wrong, but without a suspect, there was no trial. That was the end. So when media stops asking questions, what's next? The media exists to challenge power. It's one of those unstated fourth arms of government. The media needs to step up to the plate, and yet they've been silenced. Unless power owns the platform, and they can't stand up at all. The structural reality is that media consolidations have made media owned by a very, very few. I think at one point they said 6 corporations owned all of it. And how many people owned those corporations? Billionaires own it. They get out the narrative, they control it. Political alignment is a must. Advertising pressure, intelligence in the community, access to journalisms, right? The CIA is involved. State media is involved. If you want access to the White House, you play the game. Play or you don't get paid. This doesn't require secret meetings at all. It's just a movement here, a movement there. You get rewarded, you don't get rewarded. You gravitate to places where you can pay your bills. But it does require aligned incentives. Line that lands. You know, there's been more than one journalist who's dug into an amazing story to dig up the truth, all to be silenced. The younger, immature, naive, more like myself, often wonder why. This is a great story. I have the facts. I have the key witnesses. It's hard for me to come down to the point of understanding that, no, that's just a story we're not going to tell. When every major outlet tells the same version of the same story, saying the same words. We've seen that over and over again, where they show Box as an individual on a screen from one news channel after another, repeating the same company lines. And more recently, we saw this with Candace Owens. As bounties were put on her, we saw independent media and content creators saying the same lines and repeating the same content and showing the same images, also they could grab their share of the bounty. For many, it's just a game. For many, it's just filling their pocket. There's no emotional tie. There's no want for investigation or the truth. It's all about drama and clicks and eyeballs. Are we not human anymore? So when every major outlet tells the same version of the story, it's not coordination. Once again, it's risk minimization. Spin doctors. So the Tyler Robinson question. The narrative is very fragile. Over time, and by time I mean minutes, alternative explanations emerged. Some absolutely collapsed. Some had opposing evidence. Some contradicted themselves. And some were quietly abandoned. It was all wrapped up in 33 hours, we were told. That doesn't prove that the opposite is true, But it does show something very, very important. Weak narratives fail loudly. In this world of independent contact creators, technology at our fingertips, and the ability to talk across lines and coordinate and crowdsource the truth, the lies float to the top. Strong narratives don't need to be enforced anymore. Well, let's look at another scenario. What about the Butler parallel? System failure versus clean outcome. So in Butler, Pennsylvania, the outcome was immediate, clean, and final. That was it, no trial. They just erased the person's history and erased the person. Gone. No extended testimony, no procedural drift. Nothing else to see here. Move on. But in contrast, the Seth Rich case was the opposite. There were delays and leaks and retractions and confusion. So if we look at metaphors that Coach Colin uses, and a shout out to Coach, it didn't look like a finished play. It looked like a breakdown, missed assignments, improvisation, and recovery attempts. Now Coach will sit there and pretend that he's multiple people in a room and act out the parts and, oh man, I showed up late, or I forgot my mints in my pocket, to just kind of show what the strategic planning behind it was. And if one person in the link breaks it, what happens? Or we had JP make the news this last week because he sat and played two different roles across from a table and was more inquisitive about what was actually happening. And he got hit hard for that. So he stood right up into it. And this is where we need to be right now, is understanding that when we know the truth is not being told, to stand up, not only for that individual, but for ourselves. This doesn't simply imply intent, though, and it implies systems are under stress and they behave as such. Technology and false narrative construction. This is where the Erika Kirk effect truly applies. Technology reality. Digital forensics can be simulated. Somebody's DNA can be lifted and moved. It isn't foolproof at this point. Timelines can be reconstructed. Probabilities can be modeled. Public perception can be guided. When you're dealing with billionaires and militaries, you're dealing with massive inputs of simulations run out on computers and in life. Before we saw the extraction in Venezuela, you know that they had run through that scenario dozens of times. In fact, we found out that they had planned it for 4 days before and in an instant couldn't because of a weather shift. And yet we know that DARPA has major impacts on the weather. And that wasn't enough in this scenario because they were unleashing energy weapons. They play through all the scenarios. They'll step back when they need to and run forward when they need to. And in this case, for some odd reason, it was meant to be discussed. They wanted us to know. I think they wanted us to step back in fear and be silent since it was so public. But that's not where we're at anymore as human beings. We have the tools to move forward. So once again, let me read this list. Technology reality here. Digital forensics can be simulated. Timelines can be reconstructed. Probabilities can be modeled. And public perception can be guided. Except when people start talking and people pull out their own camera and show in real time what is actually happening. Who does this every day? Well, of course, insurance companies, military planners, intelligence agencies, Fortune 100 corporations. The life we live in is 100% planned by other people, every aspect of it. Even what you see on YouTube, whether or not you were brought to my channel, really wasn't your choice, was it? Even if you put in Tech Reality Barbara, chances are my video may or may not come up. but somebody can decide through an algorithm whether or not that's what will keep your eyes for the next half hour, hour. And that's where we're at. So simulations don't just tell you what happened. They tell you what's most survivable, what they think the people will say, okay, and move on. Strategic risk calculation. In risk management, which you often link to insurance policies and corporations, but this was one of my most favored classes. In fact, I'm looking to one of the tech books that I have here on risk management and insurance company. It was one of those McGraw-Hill books, the textbooks that you had to buy for the class that somehow you could go down to Barnes and Nobles and pay $24, but because it was class assigned, it was $200. Yeah, one of those books right here. Also above that, I have my strategic marketing and corporate finance books that really delve into the manipulation behind using other people's money. But here, the strategic risk calculation. When an event threatens institutional stability, the question isn't what's true. The question is what causes the least damage? Damage control. That spin doctor effect. What narrative contains exposure? What timeline reduces liability? This is how the systems think, not morally at all. That's why AI doesn't really affect billionaires or governments. They're not looking for moral or value of integrity. They don't live it themselves. But it's 100% strategic. The line that lands hard, the most dangerous thing in modern politics isn't lies. Those can be manipulated and stretched and formed and thrown in other directions. Spin it up so people forget what they're even asking. But it's acceptable uncertainty, that uncertainty that lingers. That's dangerous. So why this story never goes away? Seth Rich's story persists not because of answers, but because of silence. Humans can keep tragedy. They can accept it. What they reject is forbidden curiosity. So in the final moments here, I want to say the Erika Kirk effect isn't about Seth Rich alone. It's about what happens when institutions decide which questions are allowed to exist. Now, I remember being told when I was younger that you can either have your own plan for your life or someone else would have it for you. And this is where we need to dig in as individuals and stand our ground. Have a decision, know our roadmap. And if we're pushed off course, pop right back on it. There's some things we can't quit midway, and that's our career. As long as we're still in our lives here, we have to keep stepping forward and figuring out our next step. So once again, that Erika Kirk effect isn't about one thing or another. Seth Rich or Thomas Crooks or Tyler Robinson. It's really more about what happens when institutions decide which questions are allowed to exist. In the age of simulations, truth doesn't disappear. It gets outcompeted. So I'm curious what you thought about today's conversation, where we're at. Do you remember Seth Rich? Just years before that, we saw, what was his name? Snowden. We also saw somebody fly their airplane into one of the federal buildings, not 9/11, but the federal building in one of the southern states. How far are people pushed? There was a location in, I believe it was Oakland, where one day the feds came to raid, and I believe it was because of a USDA manipulation. And the owner would not back down and would not back down, and they're being forced to close and lose everything. Because we have to remember that small businesses are usually not just the business. That's somebody's retirement account or equity from their home. It ties up everything they have. And for government bureaucracy, they kept attacking and attacking. So he ambushed them when they came in. The story was all about him, much as what we saw at Waco, Texas. But we all know in these cases, the government oversight is really why we need the Constitution. Reminding us once again that the Constitution is not there to protect the government from the people. The Constitution of the United States of America is to protect the people from the government and to outline the rights of protections that we have. So I ask you, in the age of simulations, truth doesn't disappear. It does get outcompeted. How has that showed up in your life? In the stories you see on the news? In games that you go to with friends or peers? From assassinations to algorithms, how is reality really stabilized? Let me take a peek here. Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that comment. Yep, I agree. Thank you for that comment. Absolutely. So I wanted to look at something else, and I'm going to do this in another show, but I wanted to look at some of the news this week that has been covered up. And once again, it has to do with that Erika Kirk effect. And I think we've all kind of gone through this, especially now with so many individuals losing their jobs. Technology is the place we need to be. If we're not knowledgeable about technology, it's pretty difficult to get a paid income that's going to be sufficient enough, unless you're in a union or a politician, or there's different categories. But in all of these roles, other than the FBI that I went to see a few weeks ago that didn't even have access to a computer or a phone, we need to have that technology baseline. And so with Turning Point, as they employ geofencing, is this something that we're open to? Nobody's excited about it. Nobody wants to be tracked and manipulated. And I think at this point we can agree that no, there's really no benefit. We don't necessarily need that cute little simulation puppy from TikTok because we were alone for an evening and the phone realized that and they thought they could get in front of us and get it to that. It's not about giving us what we need when we need it. It's really about figuring out when we're most vulnerable, following our digital footprint, and emptying the change out of our pockets. Let me see if I can read this here. Truth gets outcompeted and the rise. Yeah, I really think that that's what is affecting all of us right now. And I don't know. Do you have any suggestions on how we can move past that? I really believe as a community, we can be so much more. And as I mentioned, I wanted to talk a little bit about the layoffs that are happening. With TPUSA, we saw a number of individuals come out and state that they had worked 60 to 80 to 90 hours a week, some of them not sleeping at all during that time period. And yet they were just let go. One of them came in and stated that they were let go because of something that she didn't even know to be true. The statement came from an Uber driver that she didn't like Erika. And yet she stated that she had known her for over a decade and enjoyed being part of the whole TP community. So where does that take somebody when you're cut off and you're pushed off because of the narrative? In the cases I talked about today, the individuals were not just pushed out of a job, which we believe that was what was the connection with Seth. They were pushed out of life. So was Charlie Kirk. They could have pushed him off the board, much like we saw with Uber's Travis. But instead, they were removed altogether. Now, with the level of military that was participating in, what was it, Theranos, the blood company? I guess Elizabeth just has to be thankful that she's in prison, because that was all military funded. That was a military narrative. Such was 23andMe. Let me see if I can read some of these here. You know what, let me see if I can pull that up on this screen and have a better view of that. Otherwise, I'm definitely going to need to bring my glasses out here next time. See if I, just a moment as I pull this up, and I don't want to get feedback here. Okay. Okay, let me see if that, here we go. I can see those better now. All right, thank you so much for the comments. I really appreciate that. And quite honestly, I'm going to need to look what the crown with the number 1 on is. That looks really nice and thoughtful. Thank you for doing that. Science communicator, that is going to be really interesting. I'm sorry for the next comment of it being depressing. You're right. The lies do spread faster because the manipulation is so strong. Yeah, Theranos, thank you. You know what? I wonder where you are, because I need a partner in this. And if you're willing to do that, I'm going to put my email in the thread here. So if you want to grab that, let me see if I can even add that while we're on here. But I'd be really interested to hear more about what a science communicator is. Oh, okay. Actually, in Berlin. That's awesome. Let me put this in here right now and see. I think I've got to do it from this computer. If you can look, after I disconnect this, I'm going to go ahead and put the email in the description. If you want to follow up with me there, we can connect. I know that the timing is way off, but I also consult with a startup in Germany. So I'm used to getting up earlier in the hours to communicate. So I'd love to get some insights there. That's about all I have today for this show. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up and really work on an EEOC release. But hey, thanks for joining the conversation. I look forward to talking to you further. And if anyone else has any more insights here, I'm really interested to see what we can dig out of this conversation, not just around the Erika Kirk effect, because as you know, that's just the name grab right now that's in the commentary. But really, we deserve to know what happened to Charlie and Seth, and the flip side as well, where the villains are not actually the villains. They're just patsies. In this world we live in, and especially with my own government background, we don't want to walk through life taking knives out of our back and ducking to make sure that we're safe. All right, everybody have a great day. If you're going to turn on the game, enjoy it. And we'll be back tomorrow for more information. Have a great day.